Welcome to Ideas in Action, the official University of Southern California podcast. This show was recorded live on USC's campus.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Daly, Dean of the School of Cinematic Arts, and I'm so glad to join all of you today in celebrating International Women's Day. In an acknowledgement of the inspiring ways women contribute to every field of work and culture around the world. It's about time for recognition. I'm especially happy that I'm going to have the opportunity to introduce you today to a remarkable young woman who will join us in conversation with President Carol Folt. Channing Godfrey Peoples is a writer, director, producer, and of course, what I'm proudest of, she's an alumna of the School of Cinematic Arts. Channing grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and in 2011 graduated from our MFA program in film and television production. And in a very short time, she's built a body of work that honestly and lovingly examines the experience of African Americans in the South. Whether it's in documentaries like Carry Me Home, a film she made about African American funeral homes, or Red, which she starred in as well, a film about the importance of family heirlooms. And of course, she also won a Student Jury Award from the Directors Guild for that film. Many of you may have seen her work on Sugar Queen, where she has written several episodes, and she takes her audiences deeply into all of these communities. Channing's versatility is really evident in her breakthrough feature film, Miss Juneteenth, which if you haven't seen it, do so immediately. It's a film about a former beauty queen who struggles to raise money to survive and to enter her very, very reluctant daughter into the annual Juneteenth pageant. Beginning with its debut at the Sundance Film Festival in 2020, when we all got to applaud her and sit very proudly in our chairs, the film has really received rave reviews for Channing's writing and direction, with journalists really pointing out how true it is to both its Fort Worth location and the experiences of the Black community. Channing has now been honored by Filmmaker Magazine as one of the 25 new faces in independent film. She's received fellowships from the Sundance Institute, Austin Film Society, and is a recipient of the prestigious Westridge Grant from the San Francisco Film Foundation. Needless to say, all of us at the School of Cinematic Arts are very proud of her and thrilled to have her joining President Folt today. So now let's join the two of them in conversation. I know you're going to enjoy it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It is so fabulous to be here with Channing, kicking off or really doing the culminating of our International Women's Day, and I have the chance to interview her. Most of you have probably heard that a bit about International Women's Day. It dates back to 1909, when it was called National Women's Day, and it was held in New York City. It has grown, it's marked in different ways all across the world. The United Nations actually began celebrating it in 1975, and it's now celebrated in more than 100 countries around the world. We have had an amazing celebration today. We've had interviews with fabulous women focusing on Trojan women, and they certainly are doing a lot in the world. Terrific speakers with voices from our students, faculty, our staff, and our alumni, including two leaders from our local communities. So now I have the chance to do this fabulous interview with Channing Peoples. Channing, I am a huge fan of yours, and I absolutely loved the movie Juneteenth. When I found out that you were available for this interview, I was just so excited, and I can't wait to have a conversation with you. I wanted to tell you, though, you may not know that this year we actually celebrated Juneteenth as a university for the first time. Oh, wow. And that, too, was such a beautiful celebration. So I think it'll be fabulous for us to keep up that tradition, a bit different from the tradition you're talking about, but one that really does mark the advances of people, Black Americans. And it's a fabulous chance for us to do that and then have you with us today. So we're going to talk about the film and lots of different things, but I'd love to start talking with you about how you got your start. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I have to tell you first, I am over the moon to be here, President Folt, but I know that you know that because I've told you that like 10 times before we even have gone live. And I want to thank Dean Daly for that beautiful introduction. You know, I have such great memories of my USC experience and I've taken it with me. It's a big part of how I got my start, actually. If you want to go a little bit further back, I actually grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, which is where my film is set. And on film, it feels like probably like a little country town, but Fort Worth is actually a major city. But the side of town that I grew up on was really like close knit and everyone knew everyone. And it was like a working class African American community. And there was a small community theater on that side of town, coincidentally called Sojourner Truth, that my own mother would take us to. She loved the arts and had been heavily involved in the arts. And so I got to see really complex Black plays there, just like Pearly and For Colored Girls. And I fell in love right away, I think, with storytelling. And I also fell in love with acting. And I also, I think, come from a long line of storytellers themselves. My family will often burst into story just when we're sitting together casually. So I just had a love for story, I think, all my life. And I ended up at USC in this really kind of amazing way after undergrad, which I majored in theater. I wanted to be an actor, you know, that was my goal. And I went out to California and I really wasn't seeing the parts that I imagined in my head, especially for Black women. You know, I'd seen those complex Black plays. I also loved Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and all these literary geniuses. And they, you know, one of the things that they had in common was they had stories that centered Black women and all their complexities. They were like fully fleshed out, you know, stories about Black women's lives. And those are the roles I think I saw in my head. And so I actually, you know, gravitated towards independent films because they felt like, you know, a place where you could tell a more complex story, you know, in a more hands-on way, and ended up in a USC thesis film of all places as an actor, and just really fell in love with, I think, everything that was happening behind the camera. And it was just a small group of students, you know, it's a thesis, so it was obviously more than like a lighting kit, you know, but what it was a small set, small crew, and it made it look accessible. And I said, well, maybe I'll just throw my hat in the ring and apply to USC, which was naive of me because I just had no idea how tough it was to actually get in there.
There's so much I want to talk to you about in all that. And you know, when you talk about having a non-traditional role to filmmaking, but starting in community theater, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what was it like as a young person to feel, I mean, how did you get the confidence? I think we're often talking to children, to young women, but to all our youth of today to say their stories should be told, have the confidence to do it. People want to hear your voice. Do you attribute that to your family, or were there people that really encouraged you early on that story was something that needed to be heard?
I think all of the above. Miss Juneteenth, the lead character, Turquoise, is really inspired by women. And that means women in the community, women who were in my family, you know, my own experiences as a woman, but most especially my mom. You know, I watched her with her own artistic ambitions, you know, try to juggle her own dreams with, you know, that of raising children. And that had a big impact on me. You know, one of the things that I will say that I saw in common with the women in my life was there was this sense of determination, this get it done no matter what quality. You know, some people would call it grit, but the one thing that I really noticed was no matter what, you know, the women always carried themselves with grace. You know, you never knew how tough it was in the way that they moved forward in life. And when I became a woman myself, I said, wow, you know, to be juggling all these things and still be doing it in this very graceful way. And I wanted to definitely bring that to the role of Turquoise. So I think that's absolutely inspired me. I know when I was making the film, I had a very, very young daughter. She wasn't one yet. She turned one on set, I believe. And there were moments, honestly, President Folt, when we were going to make the film, I was like, wow, my baby's so young, how will I do all this? How will I juggle it all? But I just called on the determination of the women in my life that I had seen. And I just knew that I had to keep going forward, especially as an example to my daughter, to carry forward the example that I had.
When you were coming up through cinema school, we'll come back and talk more about the film in a moment, but were there things that you felt really helped you to, the things that you learned at cinema school that helped you take this next big step from all the pieces, the other types of films that you made to make this full feature? I mean, I think you probably learned a lot about film, but what were some of the things that really stand out that the cinema school taught you that you used in the making of the film?
I really feel like my USC experience allowed me to, I came with the stories in my heart, but it gave me a place in which those stories could be nurtured without like the pressures of industry and things like that. I also got a chance to meet other creatives that are still presently in my life. I'm still very much in touch with my friends from USC, and some would later become creative collaborators. Some are in different parts of the industry. I can always call and ask a question and say, what do you think about this? We all have different levels of expertise that are helpful. I loved on a practical level, I loved my screenwriting classes. I mentioned that a little earlier before we got on here. I have kept like notes from my screenwriting classes, all the handouts, because there were handouts at that point. Okay, I'm dating myself a little bit. But they're all weathered now and well used, well worn, because, I think it really set the foundation and gave me tools in which to tell my stories. When I applied to USC, I told you I applied with a certain naivete, and I'm glad that I did because I might not have applied. But one of the things that I did come with was I came with my own stories. And USC, really, they had this thing that they said, come with your stories and the tech will catch up. So I was lucky enough to apply with, a treatment that I've written myself. And I was able to get in that way. And I'm really, really grateful because they gave me the tools, I think, in which to tell my stories.
Well, one thing they do at the cinema school I know really well is that they do introduce you to people. And networking and things like that, of course, I am sure have proved to be very, very important for you in your career. But they also get you out and get you to produce things. I think, you did SCA showcases, you did CAA, so you're no stranger to that. Did that have much to do with when you finally got Miss Juneteenth off the ground? Did that help speed it up? How did that work for you?
Well, the financing for Miss Juneteenth came through, meeting partnerships from Sundance to direct financing. But what we did, we had this wonderful experience with Bonnie. I hope Bonnie's listening right now because she does this wonderful showcase, where the students are able to show, pieces of their work at CAA, which connects us then to the industry. And what happened through there, even though it didn't lead to direct financing, we created relationships, that we're now calling on, post Miss Juneteenth. There are people that we met and said, hey, do you remember we met at the showcase? And, they recognized having met us. I now, just to talk about dreams, we were there at CAA. I'm now represented by CAA. So, I didn't feel uncomfortable walking into the room, when I walked in to sign with them. So, it was a wonderful experience. Neil and I had put together a mood reel, just in finding, a way to show kind of pace and tone and the ideas that we had for the film. And it was literally, a very homegrown mood reel. It was me, standing in his turquoise, walking around the bar with the crown on my head, and like Neil is carrying the camera. And we edited that together. And then Bonnie invited us to come to this wonderful program that she's put together. And it was a great experience for us. And we got to see it on the big screen. That was a huge thing as well.
Oh my gosh. Well, just listening to you talk about it, I feel almost as if I'm back watching the film for the first time, because it does have an incredibly personal feel. It just, the way it's photographed, the way, just everything about it, you cannot feel like you're not right there. That's just such a beautiful piece of it. So I know that you said it relates a lot to your own life, although I'm sure it's different in many ways, but you've talked about growing up in Black Texas. And can you talk a little bit more about that? How much of your own upbringing or your own images and stories of the place you grew up made it into the film?
Yes, so much. It's like such a personal film, really. I didn't even realize how vulnerable I felt in showing it until we, started screening it. It's really like laying your soul bare for the world to see, because like I just really pulled from my life, so many parts of my life, the community that I grew up in, Juneteenth itself, which is part of the fabric of my life, Miss Juneteenth, which was totally affirmational for me as a young Black girl growing up in Fort Worth. Like one of the things that I think Turquoise says in the film, like she watches, the young women come out stage and it feels like they were floating, and that was my experience. I got to see all these young Black girls who, were in every shade, in every hair texture, in every size, and it just felt completely affirmative. Also the community is so important to me, because as I mentioned earlier, it's like this close knit, this tight knit, historically Black community. And it was once this bustling Black enclave of like Black business and Black commerce. And today it's being gentrified. And so some of the businesses that you see in the film, just like the funeral home and the bar itself, they're legacy businesses. They have been passed on down through generations, and people are, holding on to those businesses no matter what, because it's theirs. It's what they own and can pass to the next generation. And so growing up in that community always felt so visceral and so alive and colorful and so real to me. And I wanted the film to feel like that. And so even in talking to my other creatives, like with my cinematographer, I was like, I want, he came down and, we kind of went around the community together, and, like the colors feel so saturated in the community. And I wanted to see that on screen. I wanted the heat to feel like that it was coming off, in every single frame, So all of those things were greatly important to me. I've also talked about, this mother-daughter story and, watching my mom navigate her own dreams with raising children. I think originally I'd written it from that perspective. It was always in Turquoise's voice, but just, it was based on having watched her. And then like right around the time, of course, I found out I was going to be able to make the film. I found out I was going to become a mom and I would have a daughter. And so that changed, I think, the film in many ways, because I had a tougher love version of Turquoise on paper. And then once I had my daughter, I discovered this intimate bond I can't even describe, fully. It was just this joy that I had for this little human being. But at the same time, there was also this, fear, because I had been, like a film school student for a long time and a starving artist for a long time. And I was like, I have to take care of this little life, So I was literally experiencing what Turquoise was experiencing in real time.
Maybe that's partly why I related to it, but you addressed some themes about motherhood, about deferred dreams, about independence that are just universal. And for all of us who are parents, there were moments, I won't say which ones in case people haven't seen them, when I felt like I was sitting right there, going through the exact feeling. And I think those themes, those motherhood, deferred dreams, independence, are really wonderful when we think about the International Women's Day. And in part when we think about COVID, because I think women and mothers, some of them are facing these issues, difficulties with these parts of our lives more than we ever thought. Have you been thinking about that as you've thought about COVID and quarantining? Has that heightened some of your feeling about the themes that you covered in the movie?
I mean, it's interesting because so the film came out right around the time, we were putting it out like right around the time that COVID, we were all discovering really what COVID was and what this pandemic meant, and then right after the film came out, then we were also navigating like the uprisings after like, the loss of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all these things that were happening in the Black community. And, we were having discussions about being able to, survive even in present day America. So there are themes, I think, in the film that we were discussing, but they have been conversations that have been having had in our community for years, And so I was always examining, I think, Juneteenth, if some folks haven't seen the film, it really commemorates, this day in which our ancestors who were enslaved people in Texas found out they were free. Unfortunately, that was 2.5 years after they were actually free. So thematically, I was examining in each of these characters, like what happens when good things come too late? What happens when freedom comes too late for these characters? What does freedom mean for each of these characters? What did it mean for our ancestors to get it late? And what does it mean for us today? So yes, I think there's so many themes in the film. There's this theme of freedom. There's this theme of, as you've mentioned so eloquently, dreams deferred, that I think applies to, many women, in our ideas, like about what we should be doing and what our lives actually look like, these ideas of like regret and our ability to be able to change our futures. So, there's a lot of things in the film that I hope people will find something and be able to see themselves.
When you film and when you're talking about places that you grew up, or, there's part of that is going on there too. Did you have things thinking about growing up in Fort Worth or growing up in Texas that you felt were important to people to know about your city and your community?
I think so. I've definitely mentioned, a little earlier in this conversation that this particular community is being gentrified. And I think for me, it was interesting because my USC thesis film was shot in this same particular community. And it also, there was a bar that we shot in there as well, which when we went back, to start researching for Miss Juneteenth, it was like a bar that had been in the Black community forever. It was where people went to dance and hang out, and it felt like a family. It was a lot like the bar in Miss Juneteenth. But when we went back and researched, just a few years later, it turned into a craft beer company. So I think for me, there's a sense of wanting to, preserve these institutions on film and not wanting them to go away.
That's really hearing you talk about that. And of course, that's something we think about even at USC right now. We live in neighborhoods that you want to be able to continue to thrive. And yet by being there, we know that we have an influence on the neighborhood. This is such an important aspect of all of our lives right now. And I feel like that's important that you're talking about that for all of us. Now, I know you have a toddler in the other room, and so far we're not hearing her. What was it like? I think she came with you and your husband to the film festival, to Sundance Film Festival, when she was just a little baby, I think you said. What was that like? And how are you doing all that?
The answer is, I don't know. But I know that there have been strong and determined women before me who have, done that and so much more, But when we were on set, we literally, created a room for her on set, in the production office. And whatever, little money that we made from the film, we paid a sitter to just hold her so I could run back and forth between takes and breastfeed her. I'm not kidding. And there were times if we didn't have childcare that day, she would be in the little baby carrier on me or on my husband. Like, we just had to figure out a way to make it work. And it was, it had its own challenges, but it also had its own joy. She really gave me a sense of joy, and really, I think the film has that intimacy and joyfulness just because I had her so close to me. And it was also a choice, I think, because she was so young. I may have mentioned this, she turned 1 on set, so she was an infant, and I just didn't want to miss that, time in her life. It just goes so quickly. I wanted her close to me. I didn't know that there would be a pandemic and we would all be much closer, not that long later. But no, she's absolutely a gift. And, it challenged me as a filmmaker. I was always preparing, I think the USC experience teaches you that, I had the film photo boarded and storyboarded and shot listed long before we ever made it. But I think that preparation, as a woman, and especially, as a mom with an infant, it makes you prepare in a different way.
That's for sure. Well, we'd love to show a clip that we have right now. I think that'd be great. So if you set that up for people, we can get it ready to show. That'd be great.
Absolutely. I won't go into much detail about it because I like people to take what they can from the film and not put my opinions on it. But it is a clip in which, you get to see the dynamic between Turquoise and her daughter, Kai. And there's a very special piece that's being recited from one of my favorite literary geniuses. So I'll just let people take a look and, we could discuss a little bit.
I did. I am a woman. Phenomenally. Phenomenal woman. That's me.
It's, I remember that. I remember it very, very well, that beautiful scene in the movie. What I'd love to ask you about, because that, of course, was commemorating someone that was really a literary genius. It was, she's reciting that beautiful poem, and you talk a lot about how you'd pick, who would you recite? Who would you want to speak when you're talking in the Miss Juneteenth pageant? Can you talk a little bit about your own literary inspirations and how you chose that piece to include in the film? I think you're on.
Okay, so that piece is from Dr. Maya Angelou. It's Phenomenal Woman. And, when you talk about authenticity, there were a couple of things. Like when I would go to the Miss Juneteenth pageant, literally, annually someone would be performing Phenomenal Woman. And there were all different kinds of iterations of this poem. People would put their own spin on it. So I, when I was conceiving of this story, I was like, telling Neil, who produced the film, I was like, we have to get Phenomenal Woman. We had no idea how we would do it. We're a tiny independent film, but he was just, determined and, reached out to her estate and wouldn't give up. And, they graciously let us use it. And I am so grateful because it informs, so much of my journey, not just in this particular story, I think, but as a woman. If you listen to the words in the film, it's just, I'm sorry, if you listen to the words in the poem, it's just completely confidence building for any woman that I think listens to it. So that is one of the geniuses, in my life. I also adored Toni Morrison, Alice Walker, Gloria Nyler. There's so many, literary geniuses that I think, really defined Black women in all their complexities for me. And I think it definitely finds a way, to weave into my work, wanting to show those complexities of Black women, especially.
I think everyone would agree that we're in a pretty special, I'm going to say an important moment in American history. And we have a chance to take what people have been talking about for so many years and fight anti-Black racism and seeing Black voices being highlighted and amplified is so important. Can you share a little bit about what you're thinking, what we can do to make sure that we continue to nurture that, and your own thought about the historical moment we're in?
Yes, I don't have all the answers. I'm an artist that, interprets, I think, voices that I hear around me. I interpret my own feelings. A lot of my art comes like pouring out of feelings that I'm experiencing in real time. And I'm able to kind of navigate it through my art. But I think that there are people on the ground, who are really doing this work, like community leaders who are making change, and those are the people I think should have the loudest voices right now. I want to, through Miss Juneteenth, hopefully this opens the door for even more Black stories to be told, especially at the independent level, especially Black stories that center people that aren't often seen on film, about communities that aren't often seen, about a historical day, like Juneteenth, that isn't often heard of. But, Juneteenth is a part of American history, and these stories should be told. So I just hope this opens the door for more Black voices. But like I said, the people that I'm listening to now are on the ground, doing the community work.
That's really wonderful. I think having stories and hearing voices from people right in this moment is really important. They're very, very powerful. I know that I watch our students and I listen to our students who are starting to tell their stories. Do you have anything you'd like to share with some of our students who are thinking at this moment that they too want to be able to help express their truths to be heard?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you asked a question I don't think that I fully answered a little bit ago, was just like, how am I feeling about the moment? I think that we're at a bittersweet moment in which, especially in the Black community, in which we've suffered major losses, as of recent. I mentioned George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, but there was also a young woman in my very own hometown in the very same community in which we shot, a Tatiana Jefferson, who was, killed by a policeman on a wellness check, not long after we shot the film. So, these are losses that we're navigating, not only as artists, but as human beings. And, I think that we have to honor ourselves, as human beings, be in touch with our feelings, because we're feeling that. And then you find a way, to bring that to your art. I, encourage people to keep telling their stories no matter what. It took quite a long time in order to get Miss Juneteenth made. People weren't like jumping up and down to make, this film that centered a Black woman, centered a Black woman with this dream deferred, in a community they hadn't seen before, about this little known day. But we pushed forward and persevered, and we're like, we want to tell the story no matter what, even if it's on our iPhone, even if it's on a 7D, we don't care. We're going to get it done no matter what.
I love that. That's really determined, at grit. And I know our students are amazing in that way. This whole generation, I think, is pretty determined and filled with that kind of spirit and that verve. So I know that it's so important for them to see you be successful and for us to see their success. Now, I do know, or I think I'm pretty sure, that you are now in the process of adapting Miss Juneteenth for a TV series. So clearly people have seen it now and they want to see more. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, your current project?
Yeah, I mean, we're very, very early in the process. It's actually with UCP, who was wonderfully supportive of my voice when I talked to them. And, I talked to them about Miss Juneteenth, but there were other television ideas I had. So it's like a first look deal in which there'll be other stories that I want to tell with them. But, Miss Juneteenth has, is navigating very specific worlds. And, there was more story that I wanted to tell. So fortunately, I got to do that. Really, one of the things that I wanted to mention too, if there's students listening to, is like I've mentioned, kind of really focus in on, telling the stories from your heart. But I think also to like really, really focus in on craft. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about technical acumen. I'm talking about the ways in which you want to tell your story. And in Miss Juneteenth in particular, like I was really inspired by like the photography of Gordon Parks. Like he has the Segregation series, which is this really beautiful series of photographs. And that informed, the way that I wanted the film to look. It also informed, it inspired me visually, just in looking at that. There were stories that I imagined in my head. I also went to the community itself, and, the community, as I mentioned earlier, is being gentrified. And it has this sense of like it's a lived in kind of timeless quality. And that informed the film. And like the pace was informed by the community having kind of like this, everything, remains the same. Nothing feels like it ever changes, even though it really does. There's this stillness about it. There's this familiarity. And so I would urge people to like really dig deep and find that sense of craft and hold on to it.
I know you've mentioned several times Neil, and I know that that's your husband, Neil Creaky Williams, whom you met at USC, and he's a producer, right? Was on Miss Juneteenth. So you clearly work together and have done a lot of projects. I'd love to hear about that. My husband and I are both biologists. We were in the same department, and we had a lot of rules about whether we could talk work at home or keep it separate. What is it like working together? And clearly it's been successful. Do you have some more projects that you want to work on together in the future?
Yeah, that's interesting because that's another thing that, I urge people to do. I feel like I'm giving advice, but I'm still learning. So, please take this with a grain of salt if it doesn't make sense for you. But one of the things that I really got from my USC experience was, meeting incredible creative collaborators. And, Neil was definitely like a very, very important part of that journey. When I talked about the thesis film that I'd done earlier, I was, away in Texas for quite a while working on it. I came back, I shot on Super 16. So we were figuring out a way to telecine, and I needed another editor to pull all of this together. And so I'd heard about Neil and, heard that we had a lot of things in common before I ever met him. We were both at USC, Black folks from the South that were telling films that often highlighted history and culture. And so I was like, excited to be able to meet him. And then we had a chance meeting one day in post. And, the rest is kind of history because like we had so many commonalities, not just about the kind of films that we made, but also, we respected each other's taste. We might not always agree on what films we liked, but we appreciated each other's taste. So like I urge people when you're at USC to take advantage of those opportunities. You might not find your principal creative collaborator, but you will find people, I think, along the way that you still touch base with, who are familiar with you and your work. I've probably talked to just today, probably three USC folks, 2 classmates and Neil at least, and having questions, about things and, getting answers to my questions that I might be unfamiliar with. So, those relationships go with you.
Have you started to think, and I imagine you have already, about some stories you're particularly excited to tell ahead?
Oh, absolutely. There were stories that I really had, invested in at USC. I remember I took the mid-level documentary class there and made a short documentary myself. And one of the things, it was in Professor Amanda Pope's class. And one of the things that she would have us do is do this wonderful thing where we did like ideation on what kind of films that, we could imagine making. And that ideation still stays with me. And it wasn't just informative for documentary. It was informative for, I think, narrative as well. I think that documentary class was a big part of like what my style came to be as well. I have this really naturalistic approach as a director, like in directing actors, and setting like a atmosphere. I love to shoot on locations and things like that. There's a documentary approach, I think, in some of my work. I don't profess to be a documentarian. I know how tough it is after taking that class, Professor Pope. But I did learn from it, about authenticity and trying to get as close to authenticity as possible. So, there's so much to learn from USC. I could talk about it all day, but I would say, definitely take advantage of those opportunities, even if you don't know that you'll become, like in my case, a documentarian one day. I still found a way to weave that into my narrative work.
I think that as we think about the next, coming year or two, we're going to see a lot of transformation. Do you think that we're going to see a change in the types of films that are made, or do you think we're going to see more films that are really about this time? Because we're seeing this burst of science fiction and fantasy, and yet we're also seeing this other attempt to sort of be semi-documentary and semi-storytelling. Do you think there's a prevailing wind blowing right now?
I think that we definitely will see a lot of change in what we're seeing in front of us. I think we'll see more stories about, unique experiences and unique experiences, because that really makes me excited. That is why I wanted to tell the story of Juneteenth, because I was so inspired by this community I grew up in, by the people in this community. I was like, oh my gosh, I could just walk into that bar and, come up with a million stories in my head, just like people watching, And so I just think about what a loss it would be not to see, unique stories from, so many different people's experiences. And so I hope that we will see more, personal stories. I think too, because we're navigating obviously COVID and what that means for production, people are conceiving of stories in different ways. Neil, my creative partner, is like much better at being able to kind of see the future of like what film will be. I think my mind is always stuck in, the past, and like wanting to bring that forward into my stories. Obviously, because I made the kind of film like Miss Juneteenth about dreams deferred. You can see what my perspective is. But I do hope that we see more personal stories. And I do hope that people see the value of investing in more stories, Black stories, obviously, are close to my heart, but more stories from many corners of the world so that we learn about different perspectives.
Well, I have two more questions. One, just purely curious. You have all these ideas. Do you carry a notebook and keep them that way? Do you put them in on your iPhone? I mean, how do you keep all that imagination and creativity going and being able to retrieve it when you want to come back to it?
Yeah, I was just thinking through that. You're a tough one, President Folt. No, I used to be so much more organized about it before I had a child. And now it's like, I'm just desperately writing anywhere, index cards, paper towel, whatever I can do. I record a lot of stuff in my iPhone. Now they have voice notes and things like that. But, the things that really tug at me never really go away. I get nervous about forgetting them, and then they come back. Sometimes they come back in a different form, which makes me nervous because I'm like, was the last version better than this one? But, when I sit down, it just kind of pours out of me. Miss Juneteenth was like that in a way, because it came from so many places that I mentioned earlier. The only way I can describe it is like, I remember seeing my grandmother quilt when I was growing up, and she would take little scraps from everywhere, an old t-shirt, one of her children's old dress or pants, something that she cherished, of her parents. And somehow at the end of the day, she'd come out with this really beautiful, like, piece of art, a quilt. And that's how I felt about Miss Juneteenth. I felt like I was just pulling from all these different places. And that's often how I approach my art.
Thank you. I love that. I love the quilt analogy. That's fantastic. So before we go, could you just share, where do you find your joy in this time when there's so much happening? You're so busy and so many things are going on. When you dig deep or find your joy. Tell us about that a little.
I mean, my daughter is my absolute joy. It's a joy that I can't even describe. It's just a smile on her face. It will just light me up. That's all I really need. I think second to that is really like feeling the energy of my art come through, and that's something I can't even explain. It's just like, I sit down at a computer, and it's such a basic thing, to sit down and type on a laptop. But I just feel like this urge to for the story to come forward, and it just feels like it flows out. And that's just this sense of joy I can't describe. It just, feels like it takes me to a whole other place. So there you have it. My joy.
Well, thank you. You have been giving all of us joy. There is something so special about hearing you talk about this and just the connections between your life and your voice on the screen and the stories that you have told and certainly will tell. So we are so grateful. It has been special having a chance to talk with you and meet you on screen. Can't wait to see you in person someday when you come back and visit at SC. And I know you're here and you help and you talk to students all the time. We're so appreciative of that. So you helped us create a beautiful International Women's Day. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's just a pleasure.
I'm so grateful to be a part of this tribe of women, this tribe of very special women. And you and Dean Daly are such a big part of that. I want to thank you for having me, President Folt. Thank you for all the difference you have made and continue to make. You are absolutely an inspiration. And I'm so grateful to have been in conversation with you. I also, want to thank Dean Daly. I think she's still listening back there for all the difference she made for me when I was at USC Film School. You're a difference maker, Dean Daly. And I loved having her there watching Miss Juneteenth at Sundance. It was so special.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we do it? Shall we fight on? Fight on.
Fight on.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and visit us at podcast.usc.edu.